Hello, my name is Ellis Woodman. I'm the director at the Architecture Foundation, and I'm here today to have a look at some of the sketchbooks of James Gowan, which are held in the Drawing Matter collection. I published a monograph about James's work in 2008 called Modernity and Reinvention, which was really the product of a series of conversations that James and I had over the course of maybe 5 years prior to that. And I got to know this whole body of work, of which the sketchbooks were, they stand almost as a sort of parallel project. Some of the things you'll see here today were published in his lifetime, but I guess they extend to maybe a dozen volumes, maybe of the kind of, maybe there's a few more than that. And they're kind of unusual, I think, maybe even unique in that they are incredibly various in terms of the range of content that's included. But some of the drawings are about working through design problems, but a great deal is so there's speculative drawings, and there are kind of a lot of retrospective drawings looking back at projects and thinking how they might have been otherwise. And quite a few things which are really drawings for their own sake. I'd say they're a strange mix of the very rational and the fantastical. And yeah, each drawing in it is really embodies an idea. So you're not seeing something getting worked through in a sort of muddy way. They're a kind of record of different sort of architectural ideas or drawing ideas, which might perhaps go on to inform a project that doesn't exist in the office at the time, but they all add up to this sort of imaginarium. So I've just rather randomly put down four books on the screen here. From different dates, and I guess what you're looking at here is a sketch for a project which got realised at the Royal College of Art very briefly, a bookshop, an art bookshop for Papadakis, I think kind of from mid-80s, 86, 87 perhaps, which was the extraordinarily brightly coloured, if you know the one that actually got realised, and it really kind of the peak of James's sort of postmodern engagement, and realised within the context of a recent refurbishment of the lower stories of the Royal College of Art building, which had been conducted by John and Sue Miller. Their work was very white and James's wasn't, and I think the rector painted out James's facade kind of within a matter of weeks. It was very contentious. Here we've got earlier things. These are I think drawings for the range of furniture that James produced for Kames Schreiber, the furniture manufacturer, for whom he also realised a couple of wonderful houses. And yeah, these are, but I'm seeing the date is 9th of May 77, which rather suggests it's perhaps a kind of retrospective drawing. These are the original Schreiber furniture with these kind of distinctive kind of pressed corners, dated from 64. I think that's when James was doing the first Schreiber house in Hampstead. What have we got here? These are more 71, December 71. These are, yeah, kind of a series of more sort of fantastical drawings. There's a kind of whole succession of these animal buildings, which we'll probably find at some point. There's one of a dog which is very celebrated. I think we entered for the Millbank housing competition, this enormous dog. But this, I guess this is a sort of dog. Not quite sure where there's a version of there's a pig I think, as well, and there's a giraffe which was going to be in the Thames, and I guess they belong to a moment when people like Hollein and Archigram are imagining the insertion of rather shocking, large monumental objects into the cities, into the urban environment. And yeah, James's project is sort of in that tradition, but he also he really likened them to H.G. Wells's from War of the Worlds. The cylinder which kind of lands in the English village. There's a slight nastiness, kind of, as you said, they're not very artistic in the way that the Archigram or Hollein things are. And he sort of associated them really with some of the later ones, maybe more explicitly with the kind of 3-day week, and they were sort of satirical, somewhat critical witnesses to a sort of state of moral decline, as he described them. Whereas, and here on the left again, a sort of, I guess it's just really it's a drawing idea as much as a building idea, but you're seeing here perhaps something of this sense of this profound interest he always had in geometric structuring of his designs. He always talked about his own building plans and building sections being developed on the basis of an ad quadratum grid. If you look at even the work that he did with Stirling, all of it's you can see that there's a sort of square grid plan that everything is kind of based around, and those dimensions also extend to the sections. And I think that kind of thinking he associated strongly with a sort of Gothic idea of architecture. It was said that he was a Goth, where Stirling was fundamentally a classicist. I think the distinction that he'd draw would be that if you're a Goth, you're interested in buildings that kind of sit lightly on the ground and have a kind of geometric structuring, and maybe a kind of dramatic sort of profile. If you're a classicist, you're interested in symmetry and static mass and taut profile. And for James, this sort of interest in sort of repetition of a unit, I think you can see, I mean, these ones have just been chosen pretty at random, but you can definitely see it, I think, in this drawing, and obviously this preoccupation with this furniture system, and also here in these study models for the housing at East Hanningfield from what have we got here, the date I'm seeing is 75. So this is a housing scheme in Essex, where he's beginning to be interested in the possibilities of pitched roofs and as kind of spaces potentially for storage, for social housing, but also as a way of animating the kind of the profile of social housing. And maybe we'll find some other drawings relating to this scheme, which had kind of coloured banded brickwork and these very distinctive round windows, all of which he associated with an strong interest in Palladio that he was developing at that time. What I'm going to do is just at random flick the pages and see what else we come up with, because these are from different moments. That's maybe a bit promising. Okay, so not so random perhaps. Okay, let's figure out what that is in a second. And then, okay, the dog I was talking about. And, okay, that looks good. And here we go. Okay, so what have we got? Yeah, so this is actually, as it happens, this is the version of these animal series, which I guess probably the last one, which turned into this kind of satirical submission for the Millbank housing competition, which I think Nick Lacey ultimately won. And I remember asking him what the house, what the project was going to be built of, and he thought it was probably going to be faced in plate gold, and but the detail would be something he might outsource to Arup. He wasn't really interested in getting involved in that. And yeah, these helicopters are sort of helicopters and Alfa Romeos are sort of they've got these kind of distinctive cars, are sort of a recurring motif in these drawings. This one is feeling to me there's a sort of a preoccupation. As I said earlier, there's a lot of retrospective thinking going on in the sketchbooks, where he's maybe looking at an old project and trying to imagine how it might have been otherwise. And that was particularly a kind of mode of thinking that he kept on going back to the Leicester engineering department that he designed with Sterling, and trying to figure out its implications. And I think when I was talking earlier about this idea he had of James being the two Jameses, James Gowan being a goth and Sterling being a classicist, and when you look at Leicester, there's this there is this sort of ad quadratum grid that structures everything. It's kind of, as James would have said, it's fundamentally a sort of Gothic building, and it's kind of thinking but blasted by Sterling's classicizing impulses. One of the things which he always thought was mad about it in maybe a productive way was there was a requirement for a water tower, so that you had the kind of water pressure that that would allow you to do these experiments in the labs below. But actually, he always said, that the impulse to have a tower, to actually have a tower of accommodation, never really made any very much rational sense. But it came strongly from Professor Park, the client at Leicester. There was a sort of strong interest in this. Just the drama of having a tower at the front of the building. But there was a sort of, he always thought, there was a sort of version of the scheme you could have done which was more sensible, as it were, that was just had the water tower in the front, and then there was a kind of low building at the back, incorporating the workshops and the labs and the offices in a more straightforward way, maybe a bit like the kind of what you'd find at Cambridge, the engineering school there. And I think maybe this is what you're seeing here, perhaps, is this interest in what might that have been like to have a tower element and a low element, that there was a more of a strong contrast between the two. And this certainly, the section I'm seeing, the kind of overhanging element at the back of Leicester, or the ramp at the front. I'm sure that that's him fiddling around with the DNA of that project. What else can we see? Yeah, and these extraordinary. These they're slightly falling apart. These, I don't know when these would have dated. Oh, well, we can see 72. Maybe there wasn't much work in the office at the time. But I guess these are the fantastical models. What are they redolent of? Well, certainly, I know that James used this sort of technique to work out the framing for the skylights at Leicester. He made these sort of boy's own balsa wood sort of models. So here we're seeing something, maybe a more kind of fantastical sort of variant of that. I guess it's sort of at the moment when maybe there would have been the Tatland Tower sort of installed, or the model of the Tatland Tower installed at the Hayward Gallery. So was it just a little before this, that the one that Christopher Woodward and Jeremy Dixon and Ed Jones and I think Mike Gold, certainly Chris Cross worked on. Some of those grunt group were sort of very involved in. So there would have, I guess, Russian constructivism would have been a kind of preoccupation there, at the AA where James was teaching. But yeah, there's always this. I think maybe you're getting a sense that there's always this conjunction of a sort of very meticulous sensibility, someone who can detail buildings fantastically well, but also an interest in the irrational. And he was taught at, initially, I think James did his degree before the Second World War at Glasgow, where he was taught in a kind of Beaux-Arts manner. And then a post-war at Kingston, where the culture of the school was very Bauhaus-inspired. And James was always left very sceptical about the claims of Gropius to be able to make architecture out of a purely kind of rational process. Tony Fretton tells this story about, Tony was one of James's students in the late 60s, about James telling him about the design process being sort of analogous to someone who's at the fairground with a magnetic fishing rod, and there would be this game that you'd play when in Glasgow, I think, and I guess in James's youth, where the water would be black with ink, and there would be these metal fish at the bottom of the fish tank, and you would move your fishing rod and with a magnet on the bottom, and try that one of the fish would leap up or not, kind of towards your fishing rod. And this for James, this was sort of analogous to the kind of process of kind of creativity. So there was something somehow ultimately sort of unknowable about where ideas came from, and I think you sense that in these books a sort of receptiveness to things coming forward that don't have a rational basis. And he was very preoccupied with Duchamp from the late 60s. He read everything about Duchamp, and maybe there's, in Duchamp's world, I think there's a similar sort of sense of the very meticulous and craftsman-like qualities of the assembly of his work, but also obviously this interest in the unconscious world. Let's flick the pages again. That's one of the East Hanningfield drawings, which maybe give an indication of the colours. Should we do this once more? Let's see if we can find something different. Okay, how about that? And okay, that looks very dramatic. And okay. Okay, I have no idea what I'm looking at, so let's go for that. But the obvious thing to say here is that that there's, you can see this Palladio preoccupation, which is certainly coming through in these drawings, and this one. Well, I guess this is almost it almost could be like kind of Palladio. Chiswick House is somewhere in the mix there, isn't it? And I guess, for this, I don't know quite how his Palladio preoccupation fits in with this kind of Gothic identification that James established, but it's certainly very pronounced. This one, I think, is what does it say? Landscape setting for villa in 3 planes, Victorian theatre set, cutouts on plywood stands. Okay, so one can sort of imagine this tableau. He was, there's a student project that he gave students at the AA maybe about 73, 74, which was hugely popular, and had sort of hundreds of submissions. It had 3 parts to it, if I remember right. There was one of which was, he gave them I think it was a plan of a Palladio house for which there was a house that hadn't been realised, and for which no elevation existed, and the students were asked to extrapolate from this plan to develop a design. And I've got a feeling these might even be a sort of, I think James did a version of a version himself, and I think these might be related to that. The other 2 projects they did, he set them were he gave them a set of drawings and photographs of the L-shaped room on the first floor of Linden Gardens, which was served as his study and his office, and they were asked to redesign this space so that it could accommodate a young couple, and could be a completely self-contained flat. And then the third thing he gave them, I think it was a bit of, he had a bit of, what would you call it, like a formwork for which he'd been using for producing some of these round-cornered bits of furniture that he was making with Schreiber. I think it was a sort of piece of metalwork, kind of metal formwork. And then again, the students were asked to kind of imagine what they might do with it. What purpose it could be put to. So there were these 3 projects which were all really about this topic of reuse in different ways and at different scales. And yeah, I guess it was. We're talking kind of probably, I'm guessing kind of 73, 74. And this was, hugely well, there was a big response to this, and all the drawings were put up on the first floor of the AA. And maybe marking a sort of a shift in sensibility from, the kind of preoccupation with the new that maybe existed, maybe defined architectural culture in Britain when Sterling and Gowan were in practice, towards a different kind of post sort of counterculture attitude to making do and an adaptation. When's this? So this one, I guess the implication is from 1990, and has something of a sort of San Elia quality, but again, a sort of, I guess he was working by that point on these very large hospital schemes in Milan, and it was this sort of strange setup where there was a kind of office in Italy which would realise these projects, but James was there pretty much on his, he was on his own for most of the time, maybe one assistant at most, and they would produce drawings always on a sheet of A4, which because that could be faxed to Italy, and they built quite a substantial number of projects that way, and I think some of them quite much admired. But you can sort of see, there's, well, this is interesting. I was thinking that this was a piece of furniture we were looking at, but again, you can sort of see that there's these little people introduced to give a sense of the scale. Instead of a structure of minimum elements, could an imbalance be economical, say, or drum column support in a thin slab the drums could be inhabited, a major / minor structure and space. No, I can't read the last word. That's from 72. But you can definitely, I think you can see this common thinking between the furniture scale and these sort of epic projects. And this is almost, this could be an old Giatti building. And then, should we do one more? Let's do another flip, and then we'll call it a day. Okay. Oh. Some of these are a bit opaque, James, come on. Now, I think I've said what I would say about some of those. Wow, there you get the Alfa Romeo and these some of these things sort of keep reappearing in different formats. I mean, this one is, I'm seeing Fort George, principal ditch and bridge from Adrian Gale postcard from 1979. And I guess that is, now if I remember right, the Fort George is outside Inverness and is the work of at least one of the Adam brothers. And Robert Adam was a particular preoccupation of James. I think James thought that there was a sort of particular quality to, there was a particular tradition of Scottish architecture, which was about the building with kind of severe, plain external appearance and with ornate interior. And he was very interested in that. He saw Adam as really the ultimate representation of that. And I think maybe a project like the Schreiber House is very, clearly is very much sort of conceived in those terms. And when the focus of the split with Stirling was around the history faculty project in Cambridge, and I think James proposed something of that kind, a building of severe exterior and very splendid interior. And Stirling was more interested in revisiting the language of the Leicester building when James found that sort of improbable as not least as a sort of language for a history library. But I think the other thing you can see in this, I can imagine why Adrian might have sent this to James, is this language of berms and ditches is very much part of the world of things like the Stirling and Gowan project for Churchill College, Cambridge, for example, or at a smaller scale, the Brunswick Park Primary School in Camberwell, and this language of ditches and berms. It kind of continues all the way through. And if you look at the late hospital, the big hospital that James did outside Milan, it's still a theme there. Let's leave it there. But I hope that's given you a kind of some kind of sense of the kind of the qualities of the work, and he was extraordinarily funny person as well, and I hope that some of that's come through. There was always an incredible precision and wit, which could be sometimes a little scary to be around, but he was much loved, and huge kind of huge influence on me when I was just first beginning to write. He was an important sort of critic for my writing, and sort of helped helped informed my way of thinking about architecture very much. Thank you. Simone?
Fantastic. You were great.
Sorry.
That was lovely.
Well, you can maybe cut out some. How long was that?
Were you always interested in it? Was that for a
Well,
long time?
well,
Early days, yeah.
I got to know him when he was designing these hospitals in Italy late in his life, and I went to see if I with an idea that I might review one for building design, and
When you first met him?
and so yeah, we sort of ended up chatting for hours and hours and hours, and then it sort of turned into this series of conversations that became the book.
That's how you met him?
Yeah, he was quite reclusive.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. But when you were younger, did you sort of...
Well, I guess I kind of also
You knew him, but...
I knew that Tony. I was very interested in Tony, and Tony always was very, spoke so very highly of him, and so I was intrigued as to what Tony had got from James. Yeah.
Did you like him?
Yeah. We were. I really adored him actually. He was very very funny guy.
Was he?
He was. I once because he had 2 daughters and. But he was living on his own. When I got to know him, his wife had just died, and he was sort of at once. People adored him, but he was also because he was a very brilliant teacher, but he was also quite reclusive and yeah. He didn't use a credit card. He didn't.
Just people like that, just didn't interact in that way.
Yeah, and he didn't. He still used fax. And so all of these, there was no computer, and all of the drawings for these big Italian hospitals were done on A4, so that they could be faxed to a working office. No, he was living on his own in this big house in Linden Gardens, on 5 floors, rattling around this house, kind of off Notting Hill that he lived in. And he wasn't seeing many people. He was seeing Mike Gold would drop in and Fred Scott, and I'd sort of go pretty much every month for about I guess 7-8 years that we were pals. And he became very when I started writing, and he was very I thought he was a brilliant writer, and he was very. He'd read what I wrote in BD, and then we'd talk about it, and it sort of there became this. He really became.
Really, it's also a mentor.
Yeah, definitely. Felt very. I learnt a lot from him.
You learnt a lot from him as well. So you really sort of got it because there's all that transmission that people would do.
I definitely felt like in learning to be a writer, there was a certain amount of ventriloquism on my part.
That's what I was sort of saying. So you received all that. I didn't realise it was that close.
Yeah, and he was. I remember visiting one day, and he'd had a fall. He was like in his 80s. He was in his 80s and bloody nose, and and
you found him?
I found him, and he was, I said, "Oh, James, we have to take you to hospital." He said, "Oh, I'm fine." And I said, "No, we'll get in a cab, and we'll go to Paddington." And I took him to A&E. And we got to the triage, and he said, the woman at the triage, said, what's happened, and he was saying, "Oh, I'm perfectly fine. I said, she was about to kick him because we're going to be, 3 hours here waiting if you say that. I was like, "No, he's had a fall and he hit his head," and then the nurse says, "Oh, and who's this?" pointing to me, and is he a relative? And James says, "No." Just a friend. "Well, not exactly. He's my biographer."
Oh,
And that was
sweet.
kind of, yeah. He was always had this very porky sense of humour.
But kind of true.
And I'd take him to see new I was trying to get him engaged with new, what was happening now.
Good stuff, yeah.
So I remember taking him to see, Adam and Peter had this open day for their brick house. And I took James and Adam at the end of this, after James had been wandering around for half an hour, said, fatally asked James what he thought. And James said, "Oh, it's a tour de force, I'm afraid." That was,
Oh my God.
yeah.
Was he always just
Yeah, very,
exacting?
very, he had this sort of use of language that was, the humour came out of the precision.
Where was he born?
He's Pollock Shields.
In Pollock Shields.
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause it's just that Scottish humour. How old was he when he actually died?
I would think he was at 2015, and
So what are we now?
I think he'd be 88 or something.
So
80,
nearly 90.
maybe 90, maybe not as
Going
much.
on 90.
Maybe in his 90s. Yeah.
Do you know the kids then?
I did. I mean, I haven't been in
Yeah, in touch with
touch so much. And there were his granddaughters.
them?
And then, when the drawings became available, we obviously negotiated about
Sure.
them coming here.
That's good.
Okay.
Lovely story, actually. It's a lovely meeting in life.
No, that was one of the special ones.